Hey buddy, how's it going? So imagine this. What if you got sucked into a wild sea tornado, and when you finally woke up, you were in a world where everyone around you was the size of ants? Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happens in this American fantasy adventure comedy movie called Gulliver's Travels, released back in 2010. Fun fact, it has an IMDb rating of 4.9, but hey, it's still a wild ride. So we start off with this middle-aged guy named Lemuel Gulliver. He lives alone in a super messy New York apartment. His morning routine, talking to superhero toys on his shelf and dancing in the shower like no one's watching. Yeah, he's a bit of a goofball. Gulliver works in the mailroom of a big newspaper company. That day, he meets this new guy, Dan, who's just joined. Turns out, Gulliver is actually Dan's boss. But let's be honest, no one at work really takes Gulliver seriously. While delivering mail together, they run into Darcy Silverman, a journalist at the company, and also Gulliver's longtime secret crush. He's totally into her, but has never had the guts to confess. Now get this, on Dan's first day, he gets promoted to head of the mail department. Gulliver's been there for 10 years and still gets no respect. Dan doesn't hold back and basically tells him that he's scared of taking risks and will never get anywhere in life if he stays like this. Feeling all sorts of emotions, Gulliver later sees Darcy working late and decides, this is it. He gathers his courage, walks into her office to finally talk to her, but totally chickens out. Instead of asking her out, he awkwardly grabs a random paper from her desk and walks out. But here's where it gets interesting. Darcy asks if he's applying for a travel writing assignment, and caught off guard, Gulliver just says yes. Now he's got to submit a travel blog by the next day. Yikes. So what does our man do? He goes home and copies articles from the internet, pastes them together, and boom, his blog is done. Surprisingly, when he gives it to Darcy, she's really impressed. She then offers him a real assignment to go explore the Bermuda Triangle and write about all the ships that mysteriously vanish there. Wanting to impress her, Gulliver says yes again. Darcy arranges everything. Contact person, a boat, the whole package. The next day, Gulliver flies to Bermuda, meets a guy who sets him up with a boat, which by the way is super automated, and off he goes, alone into the Bermuda Triangle. At first, everything's chill. He's reading magazines on how to build robots, chugging Coke, and just enjoying the ride. But then, bam! Out of nowhere, a massive sea storm hits. The waves go crazy, and then a giant sea tornado appears. Gulliver gets sucked right into it and everything goes dark. When he finally wakes up, he can't move. He looks down and sees tiny little people standing on his chest. One of them introduces himself as Commander Edward Edwardian of a place called Lilliput. Zoom out, and there's a whole crowd of these tiny people all around. Gulliver's been tied to the ground with ropes and tiny wooden pegs. The commander even calls him a beast. Gulliver freaks out, yells, and breaks free easily. He thinks he's dreaming, so he just shuts his eyes. But Edward's not having it. He orders the soldiers to bring Gulliver down again. They even hook onto his pants and finally manage to knock him out. So in this part of Gulliver's Travels, our guy Lemuel Gulliver wakes up in the most bizarre situation. He's tied to a cart and being dragged into a tiny kingdom called Lilliput. Yep, the people there are tiny, like action figure size. The whole town comes out to stare at him like he's some giant monster. He's taken straight to the royal palace to meet King Theodore, who's obviously shocked. Now, the king's daughter, Princess Mary, seems pretty sweet. She actually feels bad for Gulliver and asks if they really need to keep him tied up like that. But then there's this jealous, overly serious soldier named Edward, who tells everyone that Gulliver is probably a spy from their enemy kingdom, Blefuscia. Finally, Gulliver gets a chance to speak and asks where the heck he is. The king's secretary, Jinx, proudly announces that he's in Lilliput, the greatest nation in the world. Gulliver, he still thinks it's a prank show and literally asks the invisible cameraman to come out. Next thing you know, Gulliver is locked up in a cave. Talk about hospitality. There he meets Horatio, another prisoner who's in trouble just because he tried to woo Princess Mary. Guess who put him there? Yup, Edward again. That guy's got some serious issues. Edward shows up and hears Horatio calling him a lame ass, which obviously ticks him off. But Gulliver quickly jumps in and says lame ass actually means brave where he comes from. Edward, being totally clueless, buys it and takes them both out to work in the fields. But just then, ding ding, alarms go off. Blefuscia is attacking! They're trying to kidnap Princess Mary and even set the palace on fire. While Edward wants to play the hero and tells everyone to back off so he can save the princess, it's clear he won't make it in time. So Horatio begs Gulliver to step in, and boy does Gulliver deliver. He knocks out the Blefuscian soldiers like they're nothing and saves the princess. But wait, the palace is still on fire and the king is stuck inside. What does Gulliver do? He literally pees on the palace to put out the fire. Yes, really. And surprisingly, everyone cheers for him. The guy just became a hero, giant-sized. Grateful for his bravery, the king releases both Gulliver and Horatio from prison. That night, there's a huge feast in Gulliver's honor. The king asks where he's from, and Gulliver says, Manhattan. But the tiny folks think Manhattan is a kingdom, and since Gulliver's the bravest, he must be its president. Gulliver, loving the attention, plays along and calls himself President the Awesome. Total made-up title, but everyone buys it, well, except Edward, who's now steaming with jealousy. The next day, the Lilliputians build Gulliver a massive home with all the luxuries he never had back in New York. They even start searching for his washed-up boat, as per his request. Gulliver's loving this king-sized lifestyle, and he even makes them build a giant theater. His first big show? A dramatized version of Titanic, but with a twist. He claims it's the story of his own life. The people are blown away by his tragic past, and when Edward asks how he survived the shipwreck, Gulliver confidently says he was resuscitated. Everyone's in awe. Edward? Still suspicious, still jealous. So, Gulliver's still living large, literally, in Lilliput. And guess what? His buddy Horatio is crushing hard on Princess Mary, but has no idea how to impress her. That's when Gulliver steps in with a hilarious plan. They head over to the palace, and while Horatio talks to the princess, Gulliver hides and feeds him the lyrics to the classic song Kiss by Prince. It's awkward, funny, and somehow it works. Princess Mary actually starts to like Horatio, but then, here comes Edward, the kingdom's so-called bravest warrior, and also the guy everyone expects the princess to marry. The problem? Mary can't stand him, but she's stuck playing along. Meanwhile, things start to unravel. A search party discovers Gulliver's old boat washed up, and yes, cans of Coke are still floating around. Even crazier, Gulliver's phone is still working. He checks it and finds 12 furious voicemails from Darcy, his co-worker back in New York. Turns out she found out Gulliver stole someone else's article and passed it off as his own. Now she's coming through the Bermuda Triangle herself to do the job right. Feeling ashamed and scared to face her, Gulliver decides, you know what? I'm staying here in Lilliput forever. But Edward? Oh, he's not happy. He runs to the king, full of suspicion, but the king brushes it off. He trusts Gulliver. To show that trust, the king makes Gulliver the new general, while poor Edward gets demoted. Ouch! But Edward's not going down without a fight. He turns off Lilliput's defense system, basically opening the door for Blefuscia, their enemy, to attack. Sure enough, Blefuscia sees the opportunity and launches a surprise assault, cannonballs and all. But here comes General Gulliver. He marches into the ocean, and thanks to his giant size, he easily takes down the Blefuscians. Lilliput is saved. Everyone's celebrating. They treat Gulliver like a king, literally. They build a mini Times Square, dress like New Yorkers, and even assign people to cut his hair and give him massages. Life's good, for now. But Edward's not done being the villain. One night, he barges into Princess Mary's room, claiming he can do that because he's courting her. Big mistake. She finally puts her foot down and tells him she doesn't love him. Furious, Edward storms off to Blefuscia and makes a dangerous alliance. Here's where it gets wild. Edward finds a build-your-own robot book that Gulliver had on his boat. Yep, you know where this is going. The Blefuscians help him build a giant robot to fight Gulliver. A few days later, just as Gulliver's chilling at mini Times Square, the palace bells ring. Another invasion. But this time it's not tiny soldiers. It's a huge mechanical robot, piloted by Edward himself. He challenges Gulliver to a duel. Gulliver has no choice but to fight, but he's completely overpowered. The robot lifts him up, by his pants no less, and forces him to surrender. And just when you think it can't get worse, Gulliver confesses everything. He tells the truth, that he's not a hero, not the president, not any of the things he claimed to be. Everyone, including the king and Princess Mary, is shocked. They feel completely betrayed. Alright, so here's where things get really wild in Gulliver's travels. After Edward gets super jealous and fed up with Gulliver, he sends him off to this creepy place known as the island where we dare not go. Basically, it's their version of a no man's land. As a punishment, they just leave Gulliver there. And guess what? He gets picked up by a giant little girl who thinks he's a toy. Turns out, this island is full of giants, and the girl keeps Gulliver trapped in her Barbie-style dollhouse, dressing him up in pink, frilly clothes. Yeah, not exactly the hero's welcome he was expecting. Meanwhile, back in Lilliput, things are getting messier. Darcy's body washes ashore, and remember how Gulliver had told everyone she was his princess back home? Well, Edward sees her and immediately locks her up. Now, Darcy ends up imprisoned with King Theodore and the Queen, who were also captured after Edward overthrew Gulliver. But don't worry, our guy Horatio sees what's going on and decides to save the day. He bravely travels to the giant island to rescue Gulliver. When he gets there, he's tiny in comparison, but somehow he manages to reach Gulliver inside the dollhouse. And here's a cool twist. They discover the skeleton of a dead US Air Force pilot in the dollhouse, and Gulliver uses the pilot's parachute to escape. He flies back to Lilliput like a boss and heads straight to Darcy in prison. There, he finally opens up and confesses his feelings for her. He even apologizes for stealing her article earlier. Darcy seemed to forgive him, and there's definitely a spark between them now. With a new sense of purpose, Gulliver challenges Edward to a duel, but this time, it's not about proving himself, it's about doing what's right for Lilliput. The stakes are high. If Gulliver wins, the kingdom goes back to King Theodore. If he loses, Edward will destroy the kingdom. The fight begins, and Edward absolutely dominates Gulliver at first. But Horatio steps in and sneaks inside Edward's robot suit. Yep, there's a robot involved, and manages to disable it from the inside. That gives Gulliver the upper hand, and he finishes the fight in style. The crowd goes wild, and even Darcy cheers for him. As a reward for his bravery, Horatio gets permission to court Princess Mary, and the two share a sweet kiss. But just when you think it's all good, Edward completely loses it. He grabs Princess Mary and takes her hostage. Luckily, the princess has had enough. She punches Edward herself, knocking some sense into him. Right after that, Darcy kisses Gulliver for the very first time. Finally. Just when it looks like another war is about to break out between Lilliput and Blefuscia, Gulliver steps in again. And how does he stop the war? By performing the song War by Edwin Starr. No joke. It works. Peace is restored between the two kingdoms, and Gulliver, along with Darcy, heads back to New York on a repaired ship. Fast forward a few weeks, and Gulliver's life has completely turned around. He's no longer stuck in the mailroom. Now he's living his dream as a travel writer. He and Darcy are happily in love, and the movie ends with the two of them walking out of her office, hand in hand, ready for their next adventure together. And that wraps up Gulliver's Travels. If you enjoyed the story, definitely consider sticking around for more awesome movie breakdowns.